Thank you very much. This is, traditionally known as the graveyard shift. Straight after lunch, a whole bunch of human factors. Everybody's going to be like this. So I'm going to try my best to keep you alert and engaged as part of this. Now, I'm not going to spend a long time talking about my background other than to say 25 years in the Royal Air Force, open circuit, technical diver, closed circuit diver, underwater photographer, done a whole bunch of research into the role of human factors and diving incidents, diving performance. And I founded a company called The Human Diver in 2016, which is the goal about bringing human factors, non-technical skills, just culture, psychological safety into the diving industry. And what I'm trying to bring along with this is a contrarian view, a diverse view of how safety is managed. Traditionally, we think as humans as the things that we need to fix, the erroneous, idiots, stupid divers, whatever, that we need to address. But actually, humans are incredibly adaptive. They manage to solve the problems that we give them. And most of the time, things don't go wrong. And that poses a bit of a problem when we're trying to manage safety. My talk this afternoon is going to talk about compliance provides an illusion of safety in diving. So start off with, what do we think about safety? Often it's this absence of accidents or incidents, and we measure safety by its absence. So when things go wrong, incidents, accidents, those are what we count. And so we say that when we don't have those, then we are safe. But that's not necessarily the case. So this guy, Todd Conklin, worked a lot in high-risk industries, nuclear industry. Safety is not just the absence of accidents and incidents, but rather the presence of barriers and defenses and the capacity of the system to fail safely. So the point here is that we put training programs, equipment certification programs, all of these things beforehand to try and create things to be safe. But in reality, we've got these errant humans. We've got these people who've got variable performance, and that means that they're going to make mistakes. So how do we create an environment where we can fail safely so we don't have a catastrophic loss of life? And what we're talking about here is soft things like teamwork, communication, decision-making. It could be about first aid training, it could be about emergency training. There was a comment from Marco just talking about validating the plans. When you've got an emergency action plan or a risk management plan, how often do you actually validate the processes in there? When was the last time you did a lift from depth to then do a surface tow to get somebody on the surface and then do a resusciani? And I know Mark Powell and Tim Clements did a joint video that looked at exactly this bit and what was involved in terms of the effort. So if you've got a plan, when was the last time you validated? Now, often we talk about compliance as being the easy way of resolving this. And this is the Challenger disaster. Space shuttle lost 73 seconds after launch. And often this thing called normalization of deviance we talk about as rule breaking. But actually, if you read Diane Vaughan's book, Launch Decision, and the research she did over 9 years looking at that accident, it wasn't about rules being broken per se. It was about the perception of risk and how that was shifted. As far as those engineers were dealing, as far as they were concerned, they were following their protocols. They were managing compliance by the work that they were doing. And they shifted this perspective of what was risky and what was safe. And unfortunately, on that particular day, they ended up losing the shuttle. And then a number of years later, they lost Columbia, and exactly the same thing. And they were limited in terms of their organizational learning. And there's certain things that we can bring from those high-risk industries into the diving space. Now, one of these frameworks is something called the organizational drift model. And this applies in all areas, not just at the organizational bit, but also your area. And this is where we bring in this concept of compliance. Now, work is imagined as what I think something should happen. And I'll expand a little bit more on this in a slide a little bit later on. We write the document sets, we write the training programs, we write the certification stuff, and then we hand it over to the operator, the dive instructor, the diver. And if you're in a leadership position within an organization, your assumption is that this is what keeps you safe. Anybody who's worked in a high-risk industry, you can look at your risk assessments, your method statements, the protocols you have, personal protection equipment, all of those. And when I work in high-risk industries, I say, how perfect are those? On a percentage scale, how complete are they? And most of the people go, 70, 80%, maybe 90, depending on what it is. That means that you're never going to be at this point where safety is created. So what happens is work gets done. It automatically starts below the work as prescribed. And people, they are managing the drift because they're trying to do a good job. They're being rewarded for this. Same thing goes for instructors. They're trying to get stuff that's out there. What are they being rewarded for? Numbers of certifications, not necessarily quality. So we have this drift. It is part of our human nature to be efficient. But we also have innovation where people go above that line and they come up with good ideas. And what we want to do within an organization is harness that, because that's all about getting better and understanding those deviations that occur. Now, at the same time as individual performance is drifting against the standards that are there, we also have things called accumulations. And that might be COVID is one. It could be about outdated equipment. It could be about management processes. All of these are creating change in the background. It's not how we interact with the system. It's how the system is influencing and changing our behaviors. What we're doing as individuals is we're managing that capacity to fail safely. If we can keep those lines separated, then we're safe and we don't have an accident. Now, the problem is when those lines cross, we have this accident. And normally what happens when this thing when we have an accident, who was it? Who was to blame? Oh, I knew it was them. They're always that person. They're the risky individual. That is a natural human behavior as well. If we can blame an individual for their behavior, and we make it different to us, then actually we don't necessarily learn. Now, learning organizations, what they're always doing is they're waiting, but they don't wait for an accident. They wait to see where's the learning. You could go back 5 seconds from that accident and all the evidence of drift would exist between the blue line and the black line and between the red line and what we consider the baseline that's out there. Those evidence or that evidence that's there gives you an idea of where things are going wrong. You don't have to have an accident to have something go wrong. But it's not as easy as just saying to your instructors or your divers and say, tell me where the drift is. What's the problem? Because we need to have certain things in place. Now, I'll draw this as a block diagram instead, just to get this, the point across, reinforced, because this gap between what we have as work is imagined and work is done is critical. It's where risk exists within an organization, within your own behaviors. So I'm somebody that's, I'm no longer involved in a training agency directly. I left GUE as the Director of Risk Management in May. So I'm doing my own work and now I'm able to work more easily outside of one training organization. So if I think about what I'm going to do as a director of training for an organization, I'm free to think in multiple dimensions in time. It's not a problem to come up with some ideas. And then I have to write it down. And that becomes an issue. Because when we write things down, invariably we write left to right. We write in a serial fashion. We have to simplify our ideas, get those messages across. We have to summarize them. And we often pick optimal conditions rather than worst case conditions. And that then becomes the standard in which we're operating. So we then give that material to the operators at the front line, and they pick it up and go, great, Gareth, you missed all of these bits here. But these are the standards, and we have to follow those. They are never going to be complete. And realistically, we don't want them to be complete because we'd end up with a book this thick and then nobody would read it. So there's always a trade-off between what we're doing, our standards, and what we are executing as we go along. Now, I run a really poor business. I'm punishing people all the time for the mistakes they make, and they know it. And so what happens is if I go to, say, Simon's one of my instructors, and I say, Simon, tell me what you do. When you go and teach this course, what is it you do? And because I'm a really terrible boss and I punish for mistakes happening, Simon tells me what's in the book, work as prescribed. And I've got a whole bunch of data that I collected last year prior to the Human Factors and Diving Conference about this gap that exists where standards are not being followed because actually the standards can't be followed in a manner that they should be. And comments that came back saying, well, nobody would know I break the rules until there's an accident. So there's a whole bunch of drift that goes on out there that we don't know about. We know anecdotally, but we don't know credibly with evidence. Now, I could also say that from an organizational point of view, given the litigation that's out there, if I don't ask the question, you can't tell me the answer. And we can't find out what the drift is that's going on. Now, actually, I'm not the complete git of a boss. I'm quite a nice guy. I want to find out what's really going on and find out how that drift is happening. So I say to Kirk, tell me, how do you execute this program? And he goes, you know what, Gareth, that material was rubbish. I've had to adapt it here, and here, and here's the drift, and here's how you can make things better, because I've created a psychologically safe and a just cultured environment. He knows that I'm here as part of a learning organization we're developing, and those breaks, those difficulties that he's having, this is about improving as a learning organization. That just culture and psychological safety is not something that we would see in the diving industry at large. Having seen some bullying that's gone on with a video of a diver in Florida diving in a cave system or cabin system with his son, the people jumping on top of others for making the mistakes that are there. We're not very good at creating that environment for learning. So what we have is this gap between what's written down and the reality that's there. Are we talking about compliance with a process, tick, 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 or are we trying to get well-trained divers, educated divers who are able to dive out in the real world? This the sort of bottom line here, operationally safe or safe from litigation. DEMA, about 5 years ago, there was a panel for insurance companies. And one of the comments was, as long as you tick your paperwork and it is 100% complete, then you'll be safe. And I put my hand up and said, do you mean safe from litigation or operationally safe? Because those are two different concepts. You can tick all the boxes, but you don't necessarily manage safety. And so safety is not done at the component level, the equipment level. Safety is created at the system level. And so I look at things like the CE marking, the testing for rebreathers. I get why it's there. It's safe as a product, but it doesn't necessarily deal with the product in the operating environment. And that's a presentation that Tim Clements gave at the Human Factors in Diving Conference last year, was, does CE need to include human factors? And the simple answer is yes. The difficulty is trying to get it in there because of the status quo bias and the problems and the challenges we have. And in fact, one student said to me, you know, Gareth, the problem with bringing human factors into diving is human factors. We have so many biases that prevent us from learning. And that's what I'm trying to do as best as I can in the training that I deliver. Because out in the real world, we need experience, not compliance. And this is a quote from Sully, the captain who ditched Cactus 1549 in the Hudson. His concept was making a decision, the best decision there and then, based on the previous experiences he had. As it said here, the balance was sufficient that I could make a very large withdrawal. And if you ever watch the film Sully and you look at the NTSB report or the panel that they had, and they ran across to Toulouse, they ran the tests, or with the test pilots, they ran a simulation, they got airborne, they hit the birds, and the pilots go tick, 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 land back down straight away. It's like, oh, LaGuardia. And then they do the same thing for Teterboro, and they land back down. And Sully said, that's all well and good, but how many times had they done that before? Oh, that was their 17th attempt. All right, so they failed 16 times to get the simulation right. We had one go. And if you think about what could have gone wrong and the view of Sully as hero, if he'd made that approach into LaGuardia or Teterboro and piled into the tower blocks that were there, what would your thoughts been there? There was a lot of skill involved. There's no doubt about that. But there was also a significant amount of luck. And we judge things massively by outcomes. What we're trying to do is build experiences so we know the best decision that's out there. And that's not done by compliance. So what does this look like in practice? And this is a model from a guy called Gary Klein, did a lot of research in high-risk industries to start with. And so it started off with fire commanders. How do you fight a fire when you arrive on the scene? Well, follow the rules. Really? Let's have a look at the rule book. Actually, it doesn't tell us. What they would do is they would start to build experience and knowledge, and they would have debriefs. They'd tell stories, warts and all, where things had gone wrong. And so he came up with this model that basically said, I have a situation. I'm reaching I'll give a diving example. First time I went scallop hunting, I came back with about 4. My buddy came back with 24. It's like, hang on a minute, we're on the same scallop bed. How did that happen? I was looking, so cues, visual cues, pattern. I'm looking for a scallop that sits on the surface. I'm looking for a shell. And he went, no, you don't look at that. What you're looking for is the groove in the silt where they're filter feeding. That's where they are. Next dive, 24 scallops for me too. So what we have is this internal loop. That's where the experience is. The more mental models we have, the faster we can make decisions and the more accurate they are. That is about building experience, and it's about having feedback. So again, Marco talked about practice, practice, practice. It's practice that has feedback in a structured manner. We talk about debriefs going, often it's about what went wrong. Nothing, so we don't run a debrief. Let's talk about debrief questions. What did I do well and why? What do I need to improve on, and how am I going to do it? The why means you can replicate it again, and the how is about fixing something. The observations of what we did well and what we need to improve on are relatively easy. We need to look at the detail, and the quality of the debrief and the feedback is important. And this goes for an organizational level thing as well, but we've got to have that just culture and psychological safety. Now, diving, I said is about risk management. I've scored out the risk because risk is traditionally about numbers, and it's financial in concept. What we do is uncertainty management. What we're trying to do is bound the variability that's there. Anybody who uses a risk matrix at work in terms of determining risk, I'd ask you, how do you work out the probability of what you're doing? That's how most people work out the probability of events. And then you get an answer that says red or orange, and you're like, I know what, I'll just change the probability because I can't change the outcomes. So we end up frigging the numbers to get an answer we need. Uncertainty is managed through biases, heuristics, mental shortcuts. The ability to recall something as being a credible threat or an issue is important. We need to tell those stories, again, warts and all, about how it made sense for you to do what you did. If you sit at an organizational level, you create this framework, which is this Jenga tower here. We have a whole bunch of processes, procedures, systems that manage safety. And the problem is that looking down, like we have now, we just see these 3 bricks in a line. But when people go out and take that work as prescribed, and then they deal with the real world, they end up moving those bricks around. And when an accident happens, we sit there and go, oh yeah, it was that thing there. They didn't follow the rules. But in reality, how many little deviations and changes happen that are out there? And that is what I'm trying to do, is build resilience within the diving industry, the individuals and those that are there. And the difficulty when we set standards, and there's a quote here, Goodhart's law, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. When we reward certain behaviors, as humans, we will game the system to the best advantage we can. In high-risk industries, we have number of days since the last reportable injury, 320 days. I've just had an injury, I've just had an incident, I've hurt myself. Am I going to go to the safety team and say, I've just had this? If there's a financial bonus that's associated with that, that's even harder. Having worked on the oil rigs where they get monthly, quarterly, annual bonuses for this consistent reportable incidents being 0, guess what? Nothing happens. And you end up with situations like Deepwater Horizon, where they were getting awards for their personal safety, 5 years without a reportable incident, and yet their process safety and the issues that were going on in terms of their performance actually was a problem, and then they ended up losing the platform because there are a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on. And that is my questions. Oops, for 32 seconds to go. Compliance, there we go.